standing pose, let's make sure we can get a firm foundation, rocking from the heels of our feet to the balls of our feet, making sure that we feel those places touch the ground, and then doing our eversion and inversion, curling our toes under, rolling toward the little toe side of the foot, and then widening the toes as we press inward, curling the toes under, rotating outward, spreading the toes as we push inward. And then coming to stand, we're going to pick up our toes for a minute, making sure the inner edges of our feet are parallel. We're thinking that we're a mountain, growing from the ground, so we're lifting through the arches of the feet, tightening the quads. We're going to think maybe about pushing back between our thighs so that we can feel that greater strength and width through the hips. Let's roll our shoulders up as high as we can and then retract and depress, bringing them down. We can leave our hands just hanging at our side. We can turn our palms forward in our Virata Mudra. We can use any other mudra, a chin mudra, bringing our index finger and our thumb together. That helps us with our concentration. We're just going to tune into our breath. We know the mechanics has us breathing in through our nose, out through our nose. That we want to make sure we're using the Durga Pranayama so we can imagine ourselves either moving on a Ferris wheel or like a wave. Coming and starting that rise through the belly and then lifting and cresting high as the rib cage opens and lifts. And then lastly, starting the lift through the chest before that wave foams and curls under, back down under the next incoming wave. Finding the stillness and peace within with each breath we take. And maybe thinking about our Ujjayi breath. As we breathe out, trying to make the sound of the wave. Maybe breathing as if we were fogging up a mirror so that we have that audible exhale. That joins our breath to the breath of every living thing in the world. So we start our warm-up. We're going to slowly lift our chin on our inhale. As soon as we're ready to exhale, we'll bring our chin back down toward our chest. Nice, slow, even movement, letting the indication of the movement be controlled by the movement of the breath. Going only so far as we feel comfortable. Any soreness in the neck, we might only want to lift a little. Now let's add some movement through the shoulders. As we lift our chin, lift our shoulders straight up to the sky. And then as we exhale, dropping both shoulders as low as they'll go, chin as low as they'll go. Let's try to get the kinks out of our neck and our upper shoulders, relieving some of the tension in the upper back. And the next time we inhale, we're going to bring our arms high to the sky with a slight bend in the knees. We're going to drop our hands even with our shoulders. Straightening out our legs, we'll bring our hands to our side. Bending our knees, we're going to bring our fingertips together between our knees. Now we're going to turn our fingertips in toward our heart, stretching hands straight out in front, and then starting all over. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And just working nice and slowly with our breath so that we're getting some movement now through the shoulders and the arms, the wrists, the hands, as well as a little bit through the legs. And the next time we bring our hands up, we'll do some side bends, leaning out toward one side, maybe putting our hand on our hip or dropping it down to our side, hands together at the top, leaning out to the other side. And again, hand position of the lower arm doesn't matter nearly as much as trying to get that stretch. Lifting the shoulder as high as we can, pulling the rib cage away, from the hip we're going to widen our feet just a little bit so we can do our breathing exercise that helps us energize and reduce the stress. So we're going to start with our hands on our shoulders, and we're going to be twisting side to side. As we twist to the left, we'll lift up our right heel. Deep breath in and an audible exhale. And then coming back towards center, loosening up a little bit more through the hips. We're going to step our feet a comfortable distance apart and just rock back on our heel, maybe dropping our hips lower, coming forward, swinging our arms out, coming back, lifting the toes of the front foot as we extend the arms behind us. A little more loosening up through the legs, coming up high on that back toe when we come forward, lifting up toes on the front when we come back. Now we'll switch to the opposite side. Coming forward, stretching high, dropping hips as we come back. And you can keep facing forward. I'm going to turn to the side just for a little better visibility. And we're going to stretch our arms high to the sky in our extended mountain, Utthita. Then we're going to come into our chair, Utkatasana. We're going to drop our hips maybe just a little bit, maybe bringing them down even lower. Deep breath in as we stretch high to the sky, into our chair. Stretching high to the sky, into our chair. Now we're going into our airplane, so we're going to bring our hands even with our hips behind us, bend our head forward, come back into our chair, seeing if we can drop the hips a little bit lower. Inhaling into our chair. This time we're going to come into a fold, just putting our hands on our thighs as we bring our head down toward our toes, back into our chair. Hands down to our shins this time. As we think about tightening abs, tightening quads, into our chair, and then bringing our hands as low as we can, maybe down to the floor. Deep breath in, stretching high to the sky. We're going to put those three together. Inhaling, stretching high, chair, airplane, chair, fold, Uttanasana. Chair. Now we're going to hold it. We're going to take this to a twist. So we're going to take our arm and place it across our thighs, so we make sure that we keep the knees even, that we don't start dropping one knee. We're going to take our other hand and bring it behind our back, and we're going to pulse on the far hip, rotate through belly, rib cage, heart, thinking about top shoulder, pulling it back toward a midline as far as we can. Then if we'd like, we can take that hand up to the sky. Maybe dropping the hips even lower as we bring the hand either between our feet, making sure that we're not bringing the knees together, or even to the outside. And then bringing both hands together into our chair, our extended mountain. Taking those together in sequence again. And this time, taking our twist to the opposite side. So again, as we sit into our chair as low as we'd like, one arm comes across our thighs to keep the legs even, the other arm behind our back. We're going to take our twist to the side, turning through the shoulders. After we turn through hips, abdominal area, rib cage, and then as we'd like, maybe taking that low hand, bringing it down to the floor between our feet, to make sure we don't pull our knees together, and lifting our other hand high to the sky. If we'd like, we can take the other hand outside the foot, stretching and turning a little bit further. But still being aware that we want to keep the middle of the knee over the middle of the toe. Slowly coming back to center, stretching high to the sky. Now we're going into a sun salute. So we're going to stretch high. In our extended mountain, we're going to do our posterior pelvic tilt as the tailbone moves forward. We lift with the iliac crest. We stretch our heart high to the sky in our gentle back bend. Inhaling, coming up in extended mountain. Exhaling into our fold. Stepping back with one leg into our lunge. Both feet back into our down dog. Forward into our plank. Chaturanga. Cobra. Tailbone back up as we come into our down dog. Lunge again. Both feet together. Stretching high to the sky. Palms together. Finishing our sun salute. We'll start another one out, add some other poses to it as we get to our down dog instead of finishing off the sun salute. So we're going to start again stretching high to the sky. Exhaling into our back bend. Inhaling. Exhaling into our fold. Stepping back into our lunge and our down dog. And this time we're going to pick our leg up. We're going to stretch it as high as we can into the sky in our one-legged. We're still trying to push our shoulders back toward our balancing foot so that we don't have the shoulders coming forward. Then we're going to take this to a plank, so we can either bring the left back foot, lifted foot down to our heel, down to the floor, or drop both knees as we bring ourselves forward, pulling the shoulder blades tight, and then coming back up into our down dog. We're going to go into some lunges, warrior poses, working on building up strength in the ankles, knees, and hips by stepping forward and keeping that back heel off the ground. We're trying to get ourselves into a lunge, so we want both feet pointed directly toward the front. I have to adjust myself to get in camera. We want to make sure that back heel is lifted off the ground. So we're pushing down as hard as we can without having the heel actually touch. We're trying to maximize the stretch as much as we can through the back of the heel, the Achilles tendon, around the ankle. And now we're going to take this to our warrior 1.5 if we'd like. If we choose not to, we can either drop the back knee and bring the arms up, or we can just stay as we are. But we'd like to stand up tall so that we can stack our shoulders over our hips. We're still trying to keep the hips low. We're trying to keep that heel low without touching. We might want to stretch the legs a little further apart. And as we line up our midline with the inside of that front knee, we're going to bring our arms up and out. And now we're going to change this to our warrior 1. So we're going to bring our hands down. Virabhadrasana Eka. We're going to take that back foot. We're going to step it slightly forward so we can turn it at an angle with the heel well planted on the ground. We want to make sure that the middle of the knee is lining up over our middle foot. Bend in the front knee is whatever we feel we can do comfortably. Might be just a slight bend, might be considerable. But we keep the midline of our body lined up toward the front. We're going to inhale, stretch our arms high to the sky. But then we're going to work on the muscles of the shoulder, particularly rotator cuff muscles, bringing the elbows down to our side before we bring our fingertips together overhead. To the side, overhead, to the side, overhead. Now we're going to bring our hands together. We're going to take this to our praying warrior. So we're thinking about keeping that back foot well planted on the ground. The heel's touching, outer edge is always going to be touching no matter how we move. We can see our big toe on the front leg, and we can see that the middle of the knee is over the middle of the foot. We're going to either take both hands down to our thigh for a more gentle twist, or we're going to keep our hands at heart center. But either way, we're going to push into the back foot, we're going to pulse on the hips, we're going to rotate out toward the bent leg. And as we do so, we're going to start hinging forward, maybe bringing that elbow down to our leg. But once we do that, we want to make sure we still continue to twist through the shoulders, bringing the top elbow as high as we can, directly up to the sky. Trying to lift a little bit harder now through our core muscles, so that we're getting our heart as even as we can through our thumbs. Deep breath in, slowly coming back towards center. Standing up tall. We're going to make sure that our hips are squared away. We're not going to let them twist at all. We're going to bring our hands behind us, getting ready for our humble warrior. So if our shoulders are stiff today, we've got any pain through the shoulders, upper back, we might just want to leave the hands out, making fist or fingers widespread. Or we can interlace our fingers if we're comfortable. Pressing hard into our foot, we're going to stretch as long as we can. And pull that heart as far forward as we can over our knee, making length through the back. We're going to stop wherever we feel we should. What's happening with the glutes, what's happening with the hamstring, any pain through the abdominal area. If we'd like, we can bring that rib cage all the way down to our thigh, but only if that feels comfortable for us. If we can feel the stretch without feeling any pain. And then as we choose, we can start letting those hands float higher and higher and higher. And then slowly dropping our hands down, pressing into our feet, using our bandhas here, so we tighten our pelvic floor, we tighten our abs for stability as we stand up. Now we're going into our intense side stretch. So we're going to bring our feet now so both legs are straight, feet are pointed directly forward. They're about 2 or 3 feet apart. And we're squaring our midline again with the inside of that front leg. We're going to make sure that we don't twist it all through the hips. So let's start with our hands just resting on our hips to make sure our elbows stay even with each other. As we do our anterior tilt, hinge forward with the iliac crest coming forward, abdominals tighten, quadriceps tighten, getting ourselves as low as we can. As we come down, we might place our hands on our thigh, on our shin, or all the way down to the floor. And thinking about making sure we can pick up our toes, that we have the weight on the heels, the balls of the feet, thinking about pushing the hips a little further back, maybe even walking the hands further back, so we can increase the stretch. And this is an intense stretch intended for the hamstring on the front leg. So we want to make sure it's a comfortable stretch. And then getting ready for our balancing pose. We're going to put both hands on either side of our back foot. We're going to lift our leg high to the sky, pulling our abs as tight as we can. And we're going to do a curtsy, bringing that lifted leg behind our back, bending the supporting knee, adjusting our hands to an appropriate position before we lift the leg again. Bring it out to the side, lift the leg again, out to the side, lift it and hold. I'm balance challenged, so I'm not going to take this any further, but if you feel comfortable doing so, feel free to bring one hand into your ankle or both. And then we're going to bring that leg down. Step forward again so that we can take this to another twist. We're going to bring our hand as close as we can in toward our front foot. We're going to plant that back heel on the ground as if we were going into a warrior two. We're putting it at an angle. So the heels line up, the toes toward the outside, but we're going to press into that foot. We're going to tighten through the hip. We're going to slide our belly across that bent leg. We're going to turn away as far as we can through the rib cage. Really work on getting that top shoulder back so it's stacked over the bottom shoulder. And only when we get the shoulder turned do we think about the arm. It always completes the pose. by being an extension of the shoulder rather than the lead to the shoulder. We're going to bring that hand back. We're going to bring it to the inside of the front foot, but bring it back closer to the heel. We're going to straighten out our legs, push back to our back foot, and then we're going to think about taking the other hand as a fist, pull it up toward our shoulder, pull our shoulder back, then extend that hand up to the sky as we get ready to come into our triangle, Trikonasana. Once we get the shoulders stacked, we're going to think about whether or not we can use a little more core strength, get our shoulders, our torso a little higher so that our spine is parallel to the floor. If need be, we can get our hands supported on a leg or on a block. And then slowly dropping that hand. We'll come to a standing pose. We'll step our feet together so we can do another balancing pose, our flamingo. I'll turn to the front, but you can stay facing in the direction you were in. We're going to spread our arms out to either side. We're going to keep the one foot planted, lifting through the arch, tightening through the quadricep as we pick up the heel of the other foot. We're going to keep our knee in alignment with our sit bone as we slowly lift that leg up. We're pointing our toes down to the ground. We're finding our focal point. We're thinking about maybe bandhas here again, tightening that pelvic floor, tightening our abdominals so we can improve our balance, and then lowering the hands down to the ground. Let's loosen up a little bit through the legs by doing some pelvic circles. Just moving around as if we were doing a hula hoop, reversing direction. And now we'll do all those same poses on the opposite side. So you can stay in the same direction you were in, but for the camera's sake, I'm going to turn in the opposite direction. We're going to start as we did before, working through our sun salute, Surya Namaskar. So we start with our extended mountain into our back bend. Extended mountain into our fold. Lunge. Down dog. Plank. Chaturanga. Cobra. Down dog. Lunge. Hold. Extended mountain. And then again, starting the first part of it so that we can add a little bit more after we hit our down dog. Extended mountain. Back bend. Up high. Inch forward. Stepping back into our down dog. Lunge first, and then our down dog. Now we're going to take our leg and lift it as high as we can. We're pushing back through the shoulders. We're lifting that leg without twisting through the hips. So we make sure that we keep the hips even by pressing through both hands equally, pressing through that supporting foot into our plank of choice. So it's either one-legged, both feet down to the ground, or knees down to the ground as we feel we should. And then back into our down dog. Getting ready to go into our lunge. We're going to swing our foot forward. And again, we're going to adjust as we need to. We'd like both feet pointed in the same direction. We'd like the back heel lifted off the floor. Middle of the heel lining up with our sit bones. We can keep our lunge as it is now. We can drop our knee if we're feeling the least bit fatigued. But if we can, we're going to take this into our balancing lunge by pressing into our feet, tightening our pelvic floor, standing up tall. Maybe stepping the feet further apart. If we feel we can do so, get more stretch in the legs, a little more bend in that front knee. But back heel stays lifted. We don't try to get it in the ground. And that may be one reason why we get the feet further apart. We're trying to maximize the stretch as we can through the lower part of the leg. We're going to stack shoulders over hips and then lift our arms up to the sky. And then bringing our hands down. We're going to come into our warrior one. So we're still facing toward the front. We still keep the middle of the knee over the middle of the foot. We still see our big toe. The only difference is we take that back leg. We step it forward a little bit so we can get the heel flat on the ground. We can turn that foot so it's at an angle. Toes toward the front of our mat, heel toward the back on the opposite side. And then stretching arms high. We're making sure we're not pushing the tush forward. We're not letting it pop back. We're just getting a nice neutral hip area. Spine is nice and straight. Our midline of our body's lining up with the inside of that front leg. And again, we'll work on the rotator cuff muscles. So we're going to drop our elbows toward our side. And then we're going to rotate our hands so the palms are facing behind us, fingertips toward the ground. And then we're going to pull those hands up to the sky again. Down. Back leg as straight as we can get it, but keeping a micro bend. Never want to lock the knees. And then into our praying warrior, so it's either hands on our thigh for a more gentle version, or it's hands together. But we start the twist, pushing through that back foot, working through the hip, rotating around through the belly, through the rib cage. As we turn to the side, it's both hands resting on our leg without pulling the knee over toward our midline, keeping it in alignment over the ankle. If we'd like to, elbow to our leg, opposite elbow high to the sky. And then thinking about lifting, using the obliques, the abdominals, muscles of the back to get our heart even with our thumbs. And then rotating back towards center. Getting ready to come into our humble warrior. So not losing the alignment of the torso with the leg. We're going to bring our hands either just resting on our hips or just sitting on the back of the hips or interlacing our fingers. We go for length first through the torso. We want to get our spine as long as we can before we hinge forward. And we're going to come down slowly, making sure we can tell when we're going to start feeling any strain. Coming down as low as we'd like. And once we get in position, then we can lift our hands upward toward the sky. And then taking us to a balancing pose. We're going to put our hands, so we're making a triangle with our foot. We can shift our weight forward onto that leg, making sure that we've got a right balancing point before we pick that back leg high to the sky. Then we're going to do our curtsy again, bringing that leg down behind us, over to the side. Lifting that leg again. Down to the floor. Lifting that leg. Down to the floor. Lifting that leg and trying to get our abs as tight as we can, trying to get our body as tight as we can into our leg. And again, if you want to take this to a balancing pose, putting one hand or both hands on your ankle, feel free to do that. Then we're going to drop that back foot to the floor. We're going to rock back so we can make sure that heel is well planted on the ground. Turn at an angle again. Our front foot's directly forward. We're going to take this to a revolve pose. So we're going to take our hand as close as we can to our front foot. We're going to take our other hand up behind our back. So we concentrate on the turn through the torso first. Not trying to lead with the arm. Not trying to lead with the hand. We always get the shoulder in place first before we bring the hand up to the sky. Now moving into our triangle. Hand comes down to the floor. We push our weight back till we get our legs straight. Probably want our hand either resting back toward our heel or even behind it, or bringing it up somewhere on our leg. As we make a fist with our other hand and pull it up so we get the shoulders turned, pulling back with that top shoulder till the shoulders are stacked, pushing a little bit harder backward with the hips so we can get a little more stretch to the hamstring and that front leg. And then bringing that hand down, bending our front knee so we can rotate toward the front, come to our standing pose. And again, if you want to do this facing in the same direction as we are now, we can do so, but we're going to step with our feet together, arms out to either side. And we're going to keep that leg that was the front leg, our balancing leg, as we lift the other one. Toes pointed to the ground, knee no higher than our hip. Arms stretch out to either side. We want to turn this to a tree. All we have to do is take this leg, turn it sideways, and bring our hands up overhead. And then bringing our arms down. And again, we're going to loosen up as we'd like, doing some knee circles, reversing direction, maybe shaking out our arms forward and back. Maybe stepping our feet in place, making sure the muscles of the legs are nice and loose, because we're still going to be working on challenging, especially the upper thighs. So we're going to come into another chair, bringing our arms forward, and then bringing our hands together at heart center. We're going to keep balls of the foot at the same space they are, but we're going to turn the heels in. We're going to see if we can drop lower, maybe putting our elbows between our legs so that we can open through the inner thighs even more, stretching those adductor muscles, working on building up strength on the outside of the hip, the outside of the legs. If we'd like, we can take our hands, turn our palms to face behind us, flip it so the backs of the hands are coming across the top of our feet, coming down even lower into our garland, Malasana. And then into our balancing pose, crow. We're going to plant our hands underneath. We're going to bend through the elbows and come as high as we can up on our toes so we can get our shins resting on our upper arms. We're thinking about pulling those knees in toward each other, about lifting through the belly, tightening those abs, and slowly tilting forward. Again, I cannot do well on balancing poses, but if you choose, keep tilting forward till you can get one or both feet off the floor. Then we're going to drop down to the ground. We're going to keep our knees at the same distance apart, but now we're going to take this to our frog pose. So we're thinking about what we feel on the inner knees. This is going to be quite a bit of work, so we want to make sure that we're not causing any pain. We'd like to turn the toes toward the outside, so we're making a 90-degree angle with our feet if possible. But if not, we're going to keep the feet straight. We're going to drop down so we can put our elbows on the floor, maybe leaving our hands flat or interlacing our fingers. But then we're going to slowly lower our hips, lower and lower into the floor. Increasing the stretch in the inner thighs, working on strengthening the knees a lot because we're working muscles inside and outside, above and below, and then coming up. We're going to go into our dolphin pose. So we're going to keep our elbows underneath our shoulders, making that triangle with our hands. Dolphin is the same as our down dog, except that our forearms are on the ground instead of our hands. So we do the same thing we did before. Tailbone goes up, chin into chest, toes turn under, we lift the knees. We think about pressing through the wrists. We think about making space from the elbows up through the shoulders. If we want to walk our feet a little closer in, we can do that. And then we're going to step our feet back so that we can come into a forearm plank, keeping shoulder blades pulled in toward each other. And then we're going to drop down to the floor so that we can come into our locust pose. So we're going to bring our hands underneath our shoulders. And as we do with every back bend, we think about the posterior tilt. So the tailbone is going to move forward. Iliac crest is going to move in the direction of our shoulders, up and back. But first we want to make length through the front of the body, pressing our hands, getting our torso long. We think about slight internal rotation of the feet so we get a better movement through the hip joint. Deep breath in as we exhale. We'll lift head, neck, and shoulders and feet behind us. And then hands down to the floor. Forearms underneath our shoulders. So we can do another forearm plank to strengthen core muscles, shoulders, arms. So elbows underneath our shoulders. We want to do a more gentle version. We'll keep our knees on the ground and just lift through the hips. But if we can, we'll turn the toes under and lift the knees. We're making sure the tush is not up in the air, so we push down with the head of the femur as we lift. Push down with the tailbone as we lift through the head of the femur. We make sure we're pulling our shoulder blades in toward our spine, down toward our waistline, that retraction and depression. And then dropping our knees to the floor. We'll come back down to the ground so we can do another version of locust. If we want to stretch through the shoulders, this time we'll bring our hands around to our side. And we do the same thing we did before. Make length through the torso, slight internal rotation of the legs. Pelvic tilt, tailbone pushes down, lifting arms if we like. We can interlace fingers, try and lift a little higher. Noticing how each inhale pushes us a little higher because the belly's pushing out toward the floor. Each exhale, that belly's moving back, so we might feel a sense of dropping. And then slowly lowering down. Taking a full body stretch, maybe wiggling hips side to side to loosen up to the back before we bring our hand underneath our shoulders, push ourselves up and around in a seated position. We're going to let our toes flop toward the outside, open our legs as wide as we can, let them flop toward the inside as we bring them back, opening and closing. And the next time we open them, we're going to keep them as wide as we can apart. We're going to think about making sure that we always have both sit bones on the ground, regardless of how many variations we do. Making sure that our toes are up toward the sky, that we're pushing hard through the heels, flexing our feet, so we're still actively working the muscles of the legs even though we're seated. We're going to start with a forward fold. It's going to help stretch through the back, so we're going to rotate around far enough to get the midline of our body on the inside of our leg. Back hand's going to stay resting on the ground. Our other hand's going to come across the top of our thighs so the palm is resting on the outside of our leg. We're going to press into the ground first, get our spine as long as we can before we do our hip hinge. So it's the abdominals tight, quadriceps tight. Trying to get our lower torso down toward our leg. Maybe dropping the elbow, the back arm, all the way to the floor. And once we get the lowest part of our spine in place, then we're going to start taking our other hand and stretch it out slowly, enjoying the journey, making sure we're not overworking any muscles. Maybe reaching all the way to our foot, maybe leaving a hand resting on our thigh or down on the mat. If we feel comfortable doing so, now we can take our other hand and bring it all the way out toward our foot as well. Deep breath in, slowly sitting up. We're going to take this twist a little deeper. So we're going to rotate around even more, pulsing on this hip, rotating through the belly, rib cage, heart, so that we can get turned as far as we can, trying to get the midline of our body lining up with the outside of our hip. We're going to take our front hand, plant it on the floor at our midline, our back hand on the floor at our midline in the back. If we want to work more through the shoulders, we can lift the arms even with our shoulders in both directions. And we're going to keep facing the same direction. Hopefully we've got our shoulders lined up with this leg. We're going to take our hand and bring it down so the thumb is up toward the sky, the palms facing toward the midline. We're going to take our back arm straight up to the sky. And we're making sure that this arm is going to come directly over this leg. We want to make sure in this pose, because we're doing a side bend, that we don't start rotating toward the front and bringing this elbow, this arm further out toward our midline. So our biggest awareness is drawn to the fact that we want to keep the alignment of the shoulders with this front leg. We're just going to start leaning over, pulling the shoulder out toward our knee. As we come down, we can bend the lower arm, getting it closer to the floor. Some of us may be able to actually reach out toward our foot, but we're not concerned about that. We are concerned about trying to get a really good stretch from the hip through the rib cage, opening up all those intercostal muscles that hook the ribs together, pulling the shoulder far away from the rib cage, getting that really good stretch down the side of our body. And then slowly sitting up. And we'll switch to the opposite side. So we're going to rotate around so that our midline lines up with the inside of this leg. We're going to take the one hand across the top so that the palm is resting on the top of the thigh, fingers on the out. Our other hand rests on the ground. We do our hip hinge so that our belly is coming down toward our thigh. We think about this elbow coming all the way to the ground if we can do that without feeling any strain, particularly through the lower back. We're working on a good stretch of all the muscles of the back. So we've already got some going on in the lower part. The further we can bring this other hand out toward our foot, the more we're going to get stretch on muscles like the trapezius, the big cake-like muscle that goes from the middle of the neck to the shoulders, halfway down our back. Latissimus dorsi goes from low on the spine, comes all the way up the back and hooks up to the humerus on the inside of the arm. So the further forward we can reach, the more we're giving that muscle a stretch. And again, we take our time. We come into the pose so slowly that we will know when we are going to hit that point beyond which we should not be going. And we will be able to have that sensation of muscles being much more relaxed and getting way deeper into the pose than we otherwise would. And then slowly releasing and sitting up. We're going to take this to a deeper twist, so a little more pulse on this hip, a little more rotation, trying to bring the midline of our body, the midline of our face out toward the side of the hip. One hand comes behind us as the other one comes to our midline in the front. And if we choose, lifting hands even with our shoulders. And then dropping hands to the floor. Keeping our twist, keeping our shoulders lined up with our long leg. Pushing through the heels, keeping toes up toward the ground. Both sit bones never leave the floor. Front hand close to our leg, back hand high to the sky. And then we just do our bend without letting that top shoulder rotate forward, without thinking about letting the elbow come down, the shoulder come down, straight up over the top, as far as we would like to go, in a nice, slow, gentle fashion. Deep breath in as we come and sit up tall. We're going to take this to another forward fold, straight forward. So we can make the choice. We can keep our hands in front of us and just slowly walk our hands further forward. I prefer to walk them across the top of my legs because then I can hold on to my feet, pull myself a little bit lower. So you make a choice that suits you. But we're going to do our hip hinge again, as we always do in a forward fold. We have this bony part going in the direction our shoulders are going, slowly coming down, flexing the foot still, keeping the toes and the knees up toward the sky, bringing ourselves as low as we'd like into the pose. And releasing our hands. We're going to sit up nice and tall, pressing into the floor so our spine is long. Then we're going to think about bending in the knees, keeping the thighs out toward the side, but we're going to bring our feet together as tight as we can and our midline in the front. We're going to take this to a back bend. So we're going to bring our hands behind us, and as we let our knees drop to the side, if they're feeling tight, we can do some butterfly knees first. Bringing our heels as tight as we can in toward our tailbone. But we're going to plant our hands on the ground. We're going to push the belly forward, push the ribcage forward, pull our shoulder blades as tight as we can before we bend our chin. This is even more work to the inner thighs and our back bend than it is when we're just sitting in our regular Baddha Konasana. But we're trying to build up strength in the back, stretch the muscles on the front of the body. Anterior deltoids, pectoralis, and then sitting up nice and tall. We're going to take this to a balancing pose. So we're going to hold onto our feet. We're going to make sure that we don't let the shoulders round. If we let the shoulders round, we can cause damage to the spine, but we also are more likely to flop down on the ground when we don't want to. So that retraction and depression is going to keep the strength in the back. We lean back far enough to get our feet off the floor. We maybe press the elbows to our inner thighs. If we're not comfortable with our hands resting on our feet or our ankles, we can always hold onto the backs of the thighs. But now we're going to take this to another balancing boat, bringing our hands to rest on the back of the thighs or on our toes. We're going to straighten out our legs. And again, we're thinking about keeping the spine straight and long. And now if we'd like, we can stretch our legs out to either side. And then bringing the feet to the floor. Straightening out our legs so we can do a little bit more upper body strengthening. We're going to take this to an inclined plank. So we externally rotate the hands, starfish hands, fingers wide apart. More gentle version is to plant the feet flat on the floor. Or if we'd like, we can keep the legs straight. Either way, we use the muscles on the back to contract and lift and lift and lift, bringing the hips as high as we can off the floor. And then we're going to slowly drop down. And we're going to get ready to go into Viparita Karani, legs up the wall pose. It has a lot of benefits. You may or may not have noticed how swollen and purple my feet get. And because I have bad circulation, it is better for me to get my hips higher than my legs. If we come down and we just have the 90-degree angle, we have the fact that we've got to make that right turn to get the blood up toward our heart. So if we have the hips a little bit higher, we can get more of a straight descent. So I am going to use a bolster. You can use your mat folded up a few times. You can use a folded blanket. I prefer the bolster because it's higher, so it's more beneficial to me as I am getting that blood flow down into my heart. So regardless of what you're using, or whether or not you're using anything at all, we're going to sit sideways. And we're thinking about maybe being a fist width away from the wall so that our shoulder can barely touch the wall. We're going to lean back, plant one hand on the wall, the closest to the wall. We're going to pick our feet up, and then we're going to spin ourselves around so that we're facing with our hips parallel to the wall, our feet equally touching. If we need to adjust, we can always slide our feet down just far enough to move the bolster or the blanket or whatever it is, left or right, closer or further away. We just let our arms rest out on either side. We're going to do a little bit more work on the legs and then go into a shoulder stand if we choose. So we're going to think about letting our feet flop to the outside, open our legs wide, bring the toes back together, out again, together, out again. Now if we want to work on our core strength, we can take this to a crunch, bringing our hands between our legs. Deep breath in as we exhale, lifting, lifting, lifting. Depending on how high the bolster or the blanket is, depending upon core strength, you might be able to get your fingertips or even the palms of your hands into the wall. We'll go only as far as we feel comfortable. And then slowly dropping back down. We'll bring the feet together. We're going to take one leg and bend it slightly. We're going to take the other, cross at the ankles. Then we're just going to take the top leg and slowly slide it down toward the knee without pushing into the knee at all, and then back up toward the ankle. Just to loosen up a little bit on this leg. And now we're going to straighten out the leg that's resting on the wall. We're going to bring this other leg further and further down, bringing that ankle as close as we can in toward our hip of the straight leg. We're going to tighten the muscles on the glutes on the side and the back. We're going to really try and pull that knee close to the wall. We're going to let the muscles relax and notice how the knee starts flowing back toward our shoulder. Tighten those muscles again as tight as we can. Relax. Work those muscles, maybe even now taking this hand and gently pushing that knee even closer in toward the wall. Trying to really get that turn, stretching inside, strengthening outside. And now if we want to work on the piriformis muscle, this is just as if we were doing the eye of the needle or even a pigeon pose. We're going to keep this external rotation of the leg. We're going to keep the abducted out to the side, but now we're going to take our other leg and just slowly slide it down the wall. We might only bring it down a little bit before we feel in too much work being done, but the closer we can get this leg in toward our shoulders, the more we get that piriformis, serratus gemellus, other muscles under the gluteus maximus getting a stretch. Because my hips are higher, I can come down fairly low. You might not succeed in getting that low. But we each go where our body says it's comfortable for us. Trying to feel that stretch underneath the gluteus maximus on the back of the hip. And then slowly straightening out that leg. Both legs together. But now we'll do the same thing on the opposite side. So slight bend, cross at the ankles, just slide it up and down a few times. And I have noticeable difference between the left and right side of my hip, as you might as we straighten out this leg as I bring it down. There might be a considerable difference in the amount of work that you can do from one side to the other. We're going to tighten muscles on this leg and release. Same thing again, we're just trying to bring our attention to the work of the muscles, recognizing that muscle moves bones. And then if we'd like, hand against our inner thigh to see if we can push it even further away. And if we'd like, piriformis stretch by sliding that other foot down the wall, slowly, slowly making sure that we can tell when we're hitting the point beyond which we will be causing ourselves pain. And then foot into the wall. And we'll bring ourselves to a shoulder stand. You may know this pose, you may be able to do it easily. If so, just go into it anytime you want. But if you have not done it before, shoulder stand is that. Even though we think we're on our back and our back's doing the work, we want to be really working with pushing the shoulders and the triceps into the ground. We want to always keep our chin tucked in so that we're not arching through the neck, lifting the chin up to the sky. We're going to pull our arms as tight as we can in toward our side. We're going to slide our feet just far enough down the wall so that we can plant the feet against the wall and give ourselves a good push so we can start picking up our hips. We're going to bring our hands to our back side, maybe even on the back of the hips or up by the kidneys. Once we feel comfortable there, we're going to take one foot away from the wall. And if we dare, the other foot as well. Once we get both legs lifted, it's all core strength that gets our feet straight up over our hips. If we'd like, we can do some scissor moves. If we'd like, we can pull our knees in toward our head for our embryo. If we'd like, we can straighten out our legs, bring them down to the floor. So we'll take whatever version of the pose suits. We're pushing into the shoulders, pushing into the arms, taking the strain off our head, our neck. When we're ready to come out, We're going to bring one foot toward our head, the other toward the wall, and then bring the other foot to match before we slowly drop our hips down to the ground. Inverted pose are really good for lots of reasons. You may have noticed as we were going through the earlier poses how my feet swell, how they get red, purple, whereas when I'm in my inverted pose, I get that blood flowing, the valves in my legs are working more easily. We get rid of all that pooling of the blood in my feet, so they turn to their natural color. If we have any swelling in our legs, any soreness, fatigue in our legs, it's all alleviated by doing a pose such as this. It also does things like improve our blood pressure, help stimulate our thyroid, so it's a good anti-aging position. Doing this for 10 minutes a day does wonders for lots of people who have leg problems, like fatigue and swelling and poor circulation. So you can stay here as long as you like, tuning into our breath as we always do and letting our breath be the mechanism for getting rid of the stress. Thinking gets us away from finding that peace within. Trying to imagine who we are in the space between each thought. In that quiet fraction of a second between the intake and the outtake of the breath. Who are we really when we are not all caught up in the ego center left side of the brain? When we can get more into the right side of the brain. That side that puts things together in collages of all that is. Ourselves in the picture as one with many other things. We can stay here as long as we'd like. 10 minutes is a good length of time for this position. But whenever we're ready, we'll think about bringing our knees in toward our chest, maybe even rocking side to side for last massage to the back before we roll over onto our right side. Landing our hands on the floor and pushing ourselves up to a seated pose. Stretching our arms high to the sky, palms together down to heart